Hello and welcome to the big picture. The India-Pakistan relations has once again come under stress following recent border skirmishes leading to deaths of soldiers on both sides. It is ironical that this has happened just after a successful Indo-Pak cricket series which witnessed a lot of goodwill being generated. The escalation of conflict which we have witnessed in the last few days following the gory details about the way the two Indian soldiers were beheaded has also led to the border trade being halted. A lot of aggressive statements from both sides has also resulted in bad blood being generated. However, this is not the first time such skirmishes leading to deaths of soldiers have happened. For the last 3 years, there have been dozens of violations of the ceasefire agreement which was worked out in 2003. The infiltration attempts by the militant separatist groups from across the border has also been witnessed leading to tensions on the LOC. However, the question to be asked is, why does the atmosphere get vitiated every time the peace process between the two countries reaches a certain level of comfort? Is there a deliberate ploy to derail the peace process? We will discuss all this with an eminent panel of guests. I have with me Shankar Aiyar, Congress MP in the Rajya Sabha, Lieutenant General Raj Kadyan, former Vice Chief of Army Staff, B. Muralidhar Reddy, Deputy Editor The Hindu, who has worked in Pakistan, and on the phone line from Pakistan, Lahore actually, is Tariq Azim Khan, a senator of the Pakistan Muslim League and a former information minister. Welcome to all of you. Can I come to Shankar Aiyar first? Okay. Mr. Shankar Aiyar, can you hear me? Mr. Aiyar, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Aiyar, don't you think that it is quite uncanny that every time the peace process has reached a certain level of comfort zone, these kind of things happen?
There's nothing uncanny about it. I think we should anticipate it. After all, there are elements in Pakistan as well as in India who are not interested in the peace process.
Right.
And who have discovered that the easiest way of disrupting the peace process is to undertake some kind of an incident which will then be played up by public opinion in either country,
right,
to bring the dialogue to a stop.
Right.
And this is why I have been arguing for years that we need to structure the India-Pakistan dialogue in such a manner as to make it uninterrupted and uninterruptible.
Right.
And if at the start we've agreed that it is uninterruptible, then those who think they can sabotage the process by engineering an incident or allowing incidents to happen would find themselves not succeeding in their aim, in their goal. So instead of regarding it as uncanny, I think you should regard it as inevitable, and therefore for the dialogue to be so structured that even when such incidents take place, the dialogue continues. Unfortunately, in India, there are too many people who think that dialogue is an indication of weakness,
right,
who seem to think that talking to Pakistan is rendering a favor to Pakistan.
Absolutely.
On the contrary, the ability to speak to those with whom you have differences, but to do so in a civilized manner, is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness.
Right.
And I would urge that to show ourselves to be lions, we shouldn't be reaching for the gun. We should be reaching for the negotiating table. And if particularly you put the negotiating table across the border at Wagah Atari, and the Pakistani side doesn't have to leave Pakistan to come to the table, and we don't have to leave India to go to the table, then even in the most difficult circumstances, we will be able to talk. For it is only through dialogue that we will ever arrive at a settlement.
Okay.
Not talking to Pakistan is no way of finding an answer to our problems.
Absolutely. Okay. Mr. Aiyar, please stay back. I'll come back to you. Let me go to my guest in Pakistan. Sir, Mr. Khan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Okay, you heard Mr. Shankar Aiyar what he said. What is the situation in Pakistan when these kind of things happen? Obviously, in India, the Indian media, the Indian political parties are pretty much exercised, especially after the gory details about the way the soldiers were killed has come through. Mr. Aiyar says that the dialogue between the peace process has to be uninterrupted and uninterruptible. Do you think that a situation exists as of now for such a thing to happen?
Well, I was listening to Shankar Aiyar, and I think I couldn't have put it better. Whenever there is a dialogue going on between India and Pakistan, there are elements, and I agree with him, who would rather have it derailed than process to continue. We have had recent excellent examples of things between Pakistan and India improving to an extent that our Pakistan cricket team had to go and play in India.
Right.
They were received very well. Things were getting on well, people-to-people contact. We had a major conference only 2 days ago here in Lahore, SEFMA, where we had a big delegation of India come through. Mia Nawaz Sharif spoke to them, and one of the major points he made was that if he gets elected as Prime Minister, the foremost thing he will do will be to improve relations with India, especially trade. Now, these are the sentiments exactly the same as Shankar Aiyar has been talking about. Unfortunately, we have got elements on both sides who would not like this thing to happen.
Mr. Khan.
And this is very sad, and we hope there are people, other silent majority, they can speak up and they can speak the same way, in the same language as I just heard my friend Shankar Aiyar speak.
Mr. Iyer, Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan, you say that you are expressing the same sentiments which Mr. Iyer has expressed. But the problem is, in Pakistan, do you think the government, is there a problem with the way the government handles these kind of issues? Is there no control of the government? There are reports now saying that some of the separatist leaders have been moving around in this area where the problems have occurred in the last few days. You think,
well, you see, I would not like to get into a debate, sadly, where I blame game and pointing finger at others. In Pakistan, there's a feeling that, the thing was initiated by India, this aggression was committed by India, unprovoked. But I think the same thing applies in India. Indians are having to say that, Pakistan was the one who started it all. So the best thing was, as was suggested here, that we have an independent inquiry by United Nations Commission. There is the United Nations mission, military mission present on both sides of the border. Let them investigate. But in the meantime, the peace process, the dialogue process must continue.
Okay, Mr. Iyer, are you there? Okay, I think there's some problem there. Lieutenant General Kadyan, you heard both the politicians on either side of the border. Now, as a soldier, as a former soldier, as a soldier, once a soldier, always a soldier, I'm sure. Why do this kind of things happen? Why do this is not the first time this kind of border skirmishes happen, but why does it get escalated to this extent sometimes and not several times when it just gets ignored? Why do you think it happens?
Nikam, first of all, I fully appreciate the sentiments of the previous two speakers. And nobody denies the fact that we need to live at peace with our neighbor. But today we are discussing this subject in the light of the incident that has just happened 3 days ago. Death for a soldier is part of his life. But the way the soldiers have been treated, the way the bodies have been mutilated, the place where it has happened could not have happened but for the army, Pakistan army. Now, talking to Pakistan government is fine.
There are reports, there are claims from Pakistan that it is non-state actors that are involved in it and it's not the Pakistani army.
No, Mr. Nikam. That's why I mentioned the place where it has happened. Pakistan, this ceasefire line has been in existence for more than 6 decades.
Right.
Pakistan has a very thick line of defense, so have we. It's very difficult for anybody from Pakistan side to come beyond that line and commit this kind of crime, unless it is with the connivance or at least with the knowledge of the Pakistan army. So I don't subscribe to the theory that the militants have come.
Right.
Obviously, it is the army which has either told them to do it or they have done it themselves.
Okay.
So with this kind of, you see the pain in India today. You saw the photograph of the mother who is crying that she is not allowed to see the dead body of a soldier. That is not martyrdom. This is just treachery. This is a very dastardly crime. In the light of that, Pakistani government may be sincere in talking to us for peace. But there is obviously some agency which is beyond their control, which doesn't want the peace process to carry on. So there's no point just having a process and no peace. This time, one is happy to note that our government has sent a very, very strong note to Pakistan. Our foreign minister has used the term, look, what you've done is unacceptable.
Right.
When you examine this word, it implies that if your response is not satisfactory, we are going to do something more.
The next step we'll take.
The response obviously is not satisfactory. They are not even accepting that this has happened.
Correct.
They are not at all accepting that the Pakistani army is involved in it. The area is totally under Pakistan Army's control, so it is unbelievable. I mean, they can even make incredulous statement that, look, Captain Kalia's limbs may have been severed by weather. I mean, this is incredulous. Something like the same thing is happening this time.
Okay.
So I believe that there is some agency, and which can only be the army, which is not in their control. Army doesn't want the peace process to carry on, so there is no point carrying on with the peace process and getting our soldiers butchered like this.
You don't think the peace process should be carried on?
The way it is carrying on, unless they control the army.
Okay. Mr. Aiyar, this is the voice of a soldier, the former Lieutenant General of the Indian Army, Vice Chief Staff. These are the soldiers are very hurt by this. They get very demoralized. He says that in such an atmosphere, how can the peace process continue? Mr. Aiyar?
It's precisely to prevent such incidents. It's precisely to prevent such incidents from taking place that the peace process must continue. There are Pakistani soldiers who've died. Don't we have sympathy for them? True, we haven't mutilated them. But do you want us to mutilate them? We have to recognize that young people are laying down their lives, and some of them on our side are being mutilated because there is tension on the border and because the peace process has not gone as far forward as it should.
Right.
And while it is the job of the defense and of lieutenants general and vice chiefs of army staff to keep themselves ready for hostilities in the event of hostilities breaking out, the purpose of a civil government is to prevent hostilities from breaking out.
Right.
Our job is to so manage the matters that we don't have to resort to armed force.
Right.
And to suggest that there is, of course, a certain grey area within which, in the field, the army commanders have a certain area of freedom.
Right.
And I've heard General Malik say that we can use that area of freedom to give them a proper answer. And then when asked, what is that proper answer? He said, it's an army secret. So I accept that.
Okay.
So there is a small area of discretion that has been deliberately handed over to the army by the civil authority. But the civil authority cannot abnegate its responsibility to proceed on a process that will take us somewhere. Why should we give up all the advantages we've had through this peace process? Why should we allow ourselves to go back on what might be an imminent solution? And it's not as if we don't talk to the army about these things. The whole of the Siachen agreement, which has been arrived at between the two civilian sides 2 decades ago, has been held up because the army doesn't want it. And we have listened to the army on that.
Okay.
But the army cannot run foreign policy. The army cannot run the political process in this country. They have their role, and those in charge of the political process have their role. And while the army can provide an input, it cannot substitute the political process.
Okay, that's very interesting things you have said, Mr. Aiyar. Please stay on. Let me go to Muralidhar Reddy. Muralidhar Reddy, the deputy editor of The Hindu, who has worked in Pakistan in the past. Murali, do you think that, in the present atmosphere, what Mr. Aiyar is hoping for, that, the resumption of the peace process, that it will not get derailed, can happen?
First of all, two distinguished politicians, and Aiyar has also been a distinguished diplomat who has done some services. So obviously whatever he is saying has a lot of weight. I would like to make 2 points in addition to what they have said.
Right.
A part of the problem is the media. I don't know how many journalists have actually read the text of the army statement that came hours after this incident became public.
Right.
It was so restrained, it was very sober, but for some reasons, we media people started blasting this, making it out as if there is a war that has broken out on the border. I can give an example. The way media goes about. Zardari came here a few months ago.
Right.
It was a purely a pilgrimage visit. We all made out as if something dramatic is going to happen.
Yeah.
So we are the ones who build up these expectations, and we are the ones who create these situations partly.
Right.
Second point I want to make is there is very little appreciation and understanding of the internal situation within Pakistan. Just to give an example, today, I don't know how many people are aware, there was a series of blasts
Correct.
in Balochistan province where 170 people got killed.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it's not as if everything is, being engineered, orchestrated, and the military there is in total control of the situation.
Right. Right. Okay. At this point, let me go into a short break now. I'll come back and continue this discussion. I'm sure Lieutenant General Kadyan has something to say on this, and I'm sure both our guest from Pakistan also will have something to say on this. Please keep watching. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. We are discussing the Indo-Pak relations following the recent problems on the border and asking the question, is there a deliberate ploy to derail the peace process? Okay, Lieutenant General Kadyan, Mr. Manishankar Aiyar says that the army cannot run the political process.
Yeah, I would like to contend that point. Mr. Aiyar has said that the army should not be running the political process. That may be a fact in Pakistan. It is certainly not a fact in India. Let me prove it historically. If army was running the political process, there would have been no ceasefire in 1948, there would have been no PAK, there would have been no problem. If army was running the political process, we would not have let their 90,000 prisoners go till they came down on their knees and accepted all our terms. We would not have let Haji Pir Pass go back, which we had captured after shedding a lot of blood. When he says that 20 years ago we arrived at a solution in Siachen and the army is not letting it go, it is the army's job to give correct input and correct strategic advice to the government. That is what they are doing. But that is not defiance of authority. What Mr. Aiyar says may be true in Pakistan, where army has been in power most of the time.
And they control the...
Whereas not been in power, they have been the puppeteers. Now, Mr. Aiyar also mentioned that their soldiers died. It's not a death of soldier, I have already said so. Soldiers keep dying. But it is the butchery, it is beheading of a soldier that is hurting us today.
Yes, Mr. Aiyar. Mr. Aiyar, I want you to react on two things. One is what just now Lieutenant General Kadyan says, and also on what Murali says about the role of the media itself. Mr. Aiyar.
Okay. With regard to what General Kadyan says,
right.
I don't think he's fully appreciated the point. I am not suggesting that the army is running the political process.
Should not. You said it should not.
And I'm at the same time not saying that we shouldn't listen to the army. I'm not blaming the army for not wanting the Siachen agreement to go through. I'm pointing out to how the political process listens to the army in a classic case.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the political and diplomatic decisions will have to be taken by the government.
Right.
And the government includes the army, but the army is only a part of the government.
Right.
Now let me come to the next point. Yes, within General Kadyan's point, there is brutality and there is the unacceptability of the mutilation of dead bodies.
Right.
And these are precisely the points we're taking up with Pakistan.
Right.
And how can we tell the Pakistanis what we think of them unless we tell it to them in their face? It's childish to say we'll break the relationship because you've done this until you confess that you've done it. Because every time we've broken the dialogue with Pakistan, we've gone back to talk to them.
Right.
And we've gone back to talk to them because you can't change geography and you can't change history.
Right.
We are Siamese twins, joined at the hip. And it's all very well for General Kadyan to have the view that there shouldn't have been a political intervention because they'd have got all of POK. I don't think history bears that out. And I think one of the noblest things we did was not to needlessly keep 90,000 human beings as hostages in our country. I think the Shimla Agreement was a high point in the nobility of Indian foreign policy. Now, he may disagree with that. He's entitled to as a citizen of the country. Right. But I cannot surrender institutionally the right to decide what India should do from the civil process to the political process, because then, exactly as General Kadyan says, we would become like Pakistan.
Absolutely.
I don't want us to become like Pakistan. I want Pakistan to become more like us.
Right.
Now let's get to the media.
Right.
I think the media has not only become completely hysterical, it is encouraging people to be hysterical. And the contrast between the sobriety with which the army itself, particularly the army commander on the spot,
Right.
who rushed to Mendar in order to calm down the sentiment of our soldiers, to keep them restrained, is in such sharp contrast to the large number of retired army personnel who I've been listening to on television over the last 3 or 4 days, who keep saying red lines, who keep saying enough is enough, who keep saying we must give them a befitting answer, but when they're asked what is the answer, they say, oh, that's an army secret. Yeah, of course that response has to be an army secret, but if you draw red lines, it's for the government to draw it. Now, we've drawn these red lines in the past. We will break diplomatic relations with Pakistan if they invade India. We broke relations with them on the 3rd of December 1971 when they invaded India in the context of what was happening in East Pakistan. But we didn't withdraw J.K. Atal before that, even though there were nearly 10 million refugees from East Pakistan inside India.
Right.
And so let's please allow some room for sobriety and at the same time recognize that this is a TRIPS war. The manner in which television channels are competing with each other and being unelected, saying the nation wishes to know. Who made a TV anchor into the nation? And the arrogance which assumes that by going on provoking public sentiment, they are somehow reflecting public sentiment, I think that is a misconception. The media has come to the conclusion that it's not the fourth estate and not even the third estate, is not even the second estate, that is the first estate. And if it takes on the role of the first estate when it's the fourth estate, it's going to become the zero estate.
Okay.
So we do need the kind of sober reporting that I've seen particularly in the Hindu newspaper.
Right.
The facts that they produced are not being reproduced on television.
Absolutely.
So I'm afraid we cannot stop the media, but we live with the media, we live with retired army generals. But the country has to be saved, our young people have to be saved. They cannot be saved if tension on the border is allowed to escalate.
Okay.
And therefore, even though this is a horrible incident, the only way of revealing the horribleness of that incident to those in Pakistan who might have perpetrated it is to go and confront them with it.
Absolutely. Okay. Murali, interestingly, in fact, I wanted to bring that point. Mr. Aiyar has brought the point about the report which has appeared in Hindu, which has not appeared in any other paper since yesterday that it was reported. That there was a problem as far as India was concerned because India started making some constructions on the LOC, and that has provoked some problems. You see, why does these kind of things don't get reflected? And do you think the Pakistan media has been more sober in dealing with these kind of instances now and also in the past? As compared to India?
Pakistan media has been much more restrained on these matters. And in fact, Pakistan media is faced with so many problems vis-a-vis the establishment. And they have also seen a great deal of internal strife, and they have been reporting about it. And the problem on the Afghan border that Pakistan is facing is much, much bigger.
Right.
And yet, they never lose their cool.
Right. Okay. General Kadyan, Mr. Shankar Aiyar made very important points as far as the army is concerned. And today's newspapers, we are reading a izzat ka sawal hai. The army commanders and people like that saying that, ye izzat ka sawal hai. Izzat is more, the country is bigger than, don't you think so?
No.
The interest of the country.
I haven't read that statement, Mr. Nikam, but the question is the army commander also has to ensure the motivation and morale level of the army that he is commanding. He cannot...
No, but how do you explain the kind of sobriety with which the commanders, the press note what Murali referred to and also Mr. Aiyar referred to, the way the army itself, after the incident, they were very sober in dealing with this problem.
No, but then there is no dispute then. If the army is sober, army should be sober.
Right.
They will take whatever action they have to take They will choose the place, the time, and how and what of the incident.
Right.
But if there is no provocative statement from the army, then there's no discussion. I agree with that.
Yes.
That army does its jobs on the quiet. The question that Mr. Aiyar is raising is that he has been in diplomatic service, therefore his language is diplomatic.
Right.
I have spent 4 decades in army uniform, my language has to be back on the army. The question I want to ask him is that he is talking about a red line.
Right.
Where is that red line? Is it defined? I mean, we had Akshardham, we continued with the normal relations. We had Bombay 4 years ago where 170 people were butchered, and the involvement of the Pakistani official agency is
Established.
proved. We have now beheading of a soldier. Where is the red line? Is there a red line defined, Keval, beyond which no more?
Mr. Aiyar, quickly and last words to you. Where is the red line?
I've already answered this question.
Yes.
The red line comes when an actual invasion of India takes place.
Okay.
Every time Pakistan has invaded India, especially as it did it in 1965 and again in 1971, there was very stiff action taken. Equally, it was taken in 1999. But at the end of the day, after we have decided what is the red line and broken the relationship, they find ourselves with no alternative but to continue the relationship. And when I happened to serve in Vietnam as a diplomat,
right.
and there were many, many army people with me there,
right.
they all witnessed it. The Vietnam peace talks that took place in Paris, they started in 1968 November, and they continued all the way until 1973.
Right.
And in those 4 or 5 years, the amount of combat that took place between the Vietnamese and the Americans was perhaps unprecedented in human history.
Right.
The Christmas bombings alone, there were more tonnage of bombs dropped on North Vietnam than by both sides in the Second World War. But every Thursday, they continued meeting in Paris and found some kind of a solution at the end of it.
Okay.
Equally, as an army man, General Kadyan will know this much better. The war in Korea was brought to an end when an Indian-led force, a neutral nations repatriation commission, succeeded in sorting out the problem, and ever since then, the 2 armies, or the 2 army commanders of North and South Korea have been regularly meeting at Panmunjom.
Okay.
There's much more tension than there than between India and Pakistan.
Okay, Mr. Aiyar.
So we can have an army response, but an army response must be accompanied by a diplomatic and a political response.
Okay, Mr. Aiyar, we have come to the end of the show. Thank you. I mean, that's a very sober note on which we need to end this program. I know General Kadyan wanted to say something, but sorry, we have completely run short of time. On that sober note, hopefully the media also will act in a more sober manner and not add to the scenario. Instead of that, bring some sobriety to the occasion. Thank you very much. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Shankar Aiyar, Muralidhar Reddy, Mr. Tariq Azim Khan, who was with us earlier, and Lieutenant General Raj Kadyan. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture, same time tomorrow.